Hi everyone. My name is Aadharsh. This is my first ever Perl and Raku talk, so please bear with me. A bit about myself. I'm a master's research student at the University of Calgary. I'm guessing most of you know my supervisor, Dr. Ann Bakam. So she has been an active part of this community for some time. And today I'm here to talk to you guys about uh, my research project that I've been doing in collaboration with TPRF, and it's titled "Evaluation of Volunteering Capabilities in Open Source Software." Let's dive deeper into it. So why do we do this research? So the whole point of this research was to try and understand, as the title suggests, the volunteering scenario in an open source software community. We particularly collaborated with the Perl and Raku community because we wanted to study a community which didn't have like a single big entity behind itself in any process such as its funding or decision making, anything like that. And it also helps when your supervisor has been part of the community for some time. So it was an easy decision to collaborate with TPRF, and I'm here today just to talk to you guys about it. And I don't know if you guys remember, I actually shared a report with TPRF a couple of months back about basically the volunteering scenario. And when Stuart actually asked me to give a small presentation on it, I was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Just a bit about the entire process that we followed. So we basically divided the entire research into two parts or two phases. The first one was data collection and analysis, and the next one was the technique development and implementation. So the data collection analysis was basically to try and get some information about what is going on in the community. And the next phase, based on the information we get in the phase one, to try and solve whatever issues that were identified and to create techniques and implement those to solve those problems. So that's basically the entire framework or the rough sketch of this framework that we followed. Yeah, so the first part or the first exercise we did was on the data collection. So we basically collected data in three formats. The first one was public information. So that was mostly for me because I've not really been a part of the Perl and Raku community for ever in my life. So I just wanted to get some sort of background information as well as get some sort of perception of the Perl and Raku community from an outside perspective. So that was the main reason why we collected public information. The next one is we actually distribute a survey among the members of the community to try and understand what are some of the issues that are faced. So that survey was pretty specific. It gave us a more of a high level, holistic understanding of what is going on. And the survey was completely anonymous unless the participant chose to, give out some information like their GitHub information or some of the work that they've done. Unless they decided to do that, the survey was completely anonymous. And the last one was interviews. So the interviews was basically meant to get a more personal perspective of why of what is going on in the community. And again, the interviews were anonymous in the sense that wherever it was used, we've kept the participants' names and information completely anonymous. At the same time, we didn't get a lot of interviews, to be honest, but we were able to still get a lot of information from that. So when I gave a similar seminar a couple of months back, I got an interesting question. Why did you have to do surveys and interviews together? A survey would have just would have done the same task for you. So to answer that question, basically why we did surveys and interviews was that so a survey basically tells you what is going on, whereas an interview tells you why. So a combination of what and why actually gives us a deeper insight of what is actually going on, and whatever techniques we try to build, it will be more effective in addressing that particular issue that is there. So that's the reason why we conducted surveys and interviews. And that's basically how the data collection went. So now we've collected the data, we need to get some information out of it. Since we had two forms of data, we had to implement two types of analysis on it. So the one was quantitative and the other one was qualitative. So in our case, the quantitative data was mostly the survey. Even though we didn't receive it in that format, we were able to encode it onto a quantitative format, and we were able to employ techniques like statistical techniques, modeling theories and stuff on it. And in case of qualitative data, for us, the interviews with the qualitative data, because you can't really encode it into a quantifiable format. And how the qualitative data analysis works is basically you initially create something called as a code book, which has a series of labels or codes, which has a particular definition associated with it, and use cases of where you want to use it and where not use it. So this code book, what we do is we initially develop this code book using maybe the initial requirements, research objectives, use cases, and so on. And we code this qualitative data using it. And once we finish the initial coding process, we actually review the code book and some of the changes that can happen to the code book. So, codes can get deleted, new codes can be added, multiple codes can be merged into one code can be split into many. So these are some of the changes that can happen. And the qualitative data analysis is usually a very iterative process. So you code, you review, make changes to the code book, and you repeat the process. So this keeps on going until we hit saturation, or basically we've pulled out all the possible information from it. So in this research project, the qualitative data analysis was by far the most time consuming. It took us a lot of time to actually reach that saturation point. So we employed a combination of these two forms of analysis to gather whatever information we can from the data. So before I actually move to the results section, I just wanted to touch upon a little bit on the model of retention. So if you remember, I explained about using models on the data. So this model of retention was actually developed by my supervisor when she did a similar study during her PhD thesis, where she was compared to us, she was not studying a particular community, whereas she was studying in a broader sense multiple communities. So but the methodology and relevancy stays the same. So she developed something called as a model of retention, which consists of 5 factors that we try to map towards the intention to remain. So intention to remain is basically those factors or conditions or criteria that make a person continue contributing in a community or to even join a community. And these 5 factors, what we do is we map it towards intention to remain. And these 5 factors were actually taken so that it covers every aspect when it comes to volunteering in a community. So the first one is contributor benefit motivation. So that's basically a person who joins the community because they see some sort of benefit to themselves, and that's what motivates them to contribute. The second is social norms, any sort of social pressures a person might face that forces them to contribute towards a community. Psychological sense of community is basically the sense of environment or a sense of comfort that a community is able to create that motivates that person to continue contributing or even start contributing towards a community. Satisfaction, I don't really need to explain it. It's basically the sense of fulfillment, or you could say even happiness that a person feels when they do a contribution. And community commitment, that's basically the sense of dedication, responsibility a person has towards a community, irrespective of any all factors that's either working for them or not. So these are the 5 indicators that we try to map towards intention to remain, and this is called the model of retention. So we employ this model onto our data, primarily the survey data, to try and understand which factors are actually working towards intention to remain and which are not. So yeah, results. So if you see, there's a similar diagram as before, but it's got a little more data on it. So I think the first thing when you see it is that the first thing that stands out is that 2 of them are actually shaded in a thicker shade of blue. So that if you look at psychological sense of community, it actually makes up for 22% of the intention to remain. So what that means is that the community has been able to create an environment that is conducive to a person. But then at the same time, if you look at the difference between the second highest factor and the highest factor, it's pretty big. So even though the community has been able to do that, it's not been able to do it to such an extent, or it has been on a certain level and it's been in a downward trajectory since then. So those are some of the inferences that we can take from that. Community commitment makes up for 58% of the intention to remain. So the only inference that we can take is that the community is filled with people who are loyal, who are dedicated towards the community, and has a sense of responsibility. So that's something that's going good for the community. Another thing, if you see, is that social norms is actually marked in red. What that basically means is that it has a negative impact on the intention to remain. It's actually negatively correlated. So what one inference that we can make from that is that there are no such societal pressures, or you could say even industry pressures, person faces that forces them to contribute towards the community. It's more of the people who actually come are genuinely interested in the community, genuinely want to make an impact on it. So that's why social norms is marked in red. But also another inference that we can bring up is on the relevancy of the community. So if a community is not able to exert even that little bit of pressure, so how relevant is it today? So that's something we can also infer from this. So this is just the data, the information that we got from the qualitative data analysis. Again, so if we see this, it tells us what factors are working, what factors are not. And so now we know what is going on, but we need to understand why these factors are so. So to do, you have a question?
I do.
Yeah.
The question is, I don't understand what you mean by social norm. I understand what negative impact is. Can you give an example of a social norm?
Yeah. So let's say a person who. Yeah. So an example of social norms is basically a question, right? A negative or positive impact. So let's say a person who is able to. If let's say if a person who is not very big in the tech industry, who is learning new things. So the first choice, let's say he wants to do a meaningful contribution to learn about, let's say, a programming language. So the first thing that comes into that person's mind might not be Perl and Raku, because it's not as how do I put this, popular as compared to some of the other languages, for example. So if it were me, maybe the first language that comes into my mind is Python, for example, right? So that is the social norm or the social pressure that actually is exerted on a person. So the people, what that means is the people who actually are coming to Perl have a lot of history with Perl, genuinely use Perl for quite some time, and they have a big relationship with it. Whereas a person who's new, Perl is not, or Perl and Raku is not the first choice of programming language. So that's where we see that social norms doesn't really play a role. So that's where I came up with the term of relevancy, right? So how relevant is it in today's time? So yeah, that's basically about that. So again, like I was saying, we understood what is going wrong. Yeah.
Is it surprising that computer-based motivation is only 8%?
Yeah. So again, so one thing that we saw was for contributor benefit motivation to work, you need. So it's for people who see some sort of impact, let's say, on their business. So if they're a person who uses a programming language for their business, so they need to see some sort of benefit out of it, even if they're contributing towards the community, right, to make it better, even if it's for themselves. So what we see is, out of all the people that are there, the factor of contributor benefit motivation is very low. So people are not contributing because they see some sort of benefit to themselves. They are contributing maybe out of genuine interest, or they just like Perl and Raku, right? So I'm not saying that's not the case. There might be people who have some sort of business relevancy or some sort of benefit to themselves, but it's not the wider case, right? So that's what it means. Yeah. Any other questions? So we've understood what, we need to understand why. So again, from the qualitative data analysis, this is pretty much the only information we can get. So to understand why, we need to go deeper into the qualitative data. And again, I've grouped it based on the different indicators to see why exactly those indicators don't stack up. Again, one of the things that we saw for contributor benefit motivation, and this is something that we saw in all the interviews, is that it's not a very pleasant thing, but the Perl community, or basically the entire community, is kind of shrinking. It's going down. There are less number of people joining every year, and there are people actually leaving the community for maybe other languages. And one of the reasons for that may be modules being abandoned. So one of the things that I saw from one of the public information that I gathered was people are not able to, or they're switching to other languages because that particular project that they want to implement is no longer supported on Perl, right? And the time it takes for them to make it get supported on Perl is much higher and takes a lot of resources as compared to maybe some other language where the support is already there. So that's one of the reasons why we think contributor benefit motivation is actually less. Again, that's answering your question again. So yeah, it's, again, I've just listed a few as an example here because I can't list the entire thing. It's more extensively explained on the report which I submitted. But yeah, this is one of the major reasons that we saw, and this was talked about in each and every single interview where the community is shrinking. So that's one of the things we need to fight and reverse, basically. Social norms. Again, to answer one of the other questions, social norms generally doesn't play a big role on open source software communities because most of them are volunteer based, so it's out of their own interest. But then again, if you were to pinpoint on one of the problems one of the things that even exert even that small amount of pressure on people to contribute is maybe again the popularity of the community. It's not something that's as widely popular as some time ago as compared to some of the other languages that's there today. It's not developing at that pace maybe compared to other languages. So again, this is one of the reasons why it's why social norm doesn't play a big role. Again, psychological sense of community. So you saw that was the second highest factor towards intention to remain. And one thing that we really saw was that the Perl community, or Perl and Raku community, has been able to create an environment and have people from very diverse backgrounds, even geographically speaking. So that's something that's really good because for any organization to create inclusivity is one of the most challenging and most difficult tasks. And Perl and Raku community has been able to do that. So that's something that's really good. But then again, why is it not up to that extent, or is it not proportionate to some of the other indicators, for example, community commitment? So the reason for that is, again, this was said in most of the interviews, was the often unwelcoming and abrasive personalities that's shown, especially to newcomers. Again, it's a bit of a sore point. But then again, for an organization that really requires volunteers, that really is basically an organization that works on volunteers, we need to change this. This is something that needs to be really worked upon, right? So that's one of the reasons why it contributes to a psychological sense of community. Again, satisfaction. So one of the things again we saw was that low availability of volunteers. So the community is shrinking. So that means that there are not enough people to work on certain projects, and that basically dampens the development progress and cycle, basically. Another inference when it comes to volunteers is that some of the volunteers don't really stick is because they don't really follow the norms and disciplines of the community of the way of contribution, which really affects the work done by the more habitual volunteers, right? So that's again one of the reasons why it can really cause frustration for the actual habitual volunteers and can dampen the satisfaction level. And of course, lack of funding. This was again a point that was talked about pretty extensively. So, not being able to pursue more ambitious projects, and some of the projects even being scrapped because of the lack of funding is maybe one of the reasons why it affects a person's satisfaction level. So that's again an example for why satisfaction levels was pretty low. Again, community commitment, the only inference that we can make is whoever is remaining in the Perl and Raku community are people who are actually super dedicated, super loyal towards the community. So they don't really worry about if things are working for them or not within the community. And for any community that's trying to revitalize itself, to change that downward trajectory to an upward trajectory, it's very important to have people who are dedicated towards the cause. So that's something that's going good. So again, of all the negative things that were shown, something that's going good for the community, and that's something Perl and Raku has been able to do really well. So that's something good. So we've identified what are some of the problems that are being faced. Again, I just gave a few examples out of some of the many that I was identified. And to try and solve these, we actually proposed 35 techniques, again, grouped under the different issues that we saw. And these 35 techniques, most of them were actually taken from past literature, techniques that have actually been implemented and worked. And of course, some of them were developed specifically to address some of the issues that are being faced by Perl and Raku. So again, just one example. So we saw popularity has been one of the biggest factors. So one of the proposed solutions was to recruit people who enjoy social media, and not just general social media influencers, but there are people in the technical space who actually have a big following. So to potentially collaborate with them and getting the word out about Perl, making people more aware about Perl is something that can really help in increasing the popularity. The other one is university and corporate outreach. So as a student myself, I actually get a ton of emails every day about, especially from undergraduate students, if they could collaborate with me on my research project. So unfortunately, I cannot do that because of university protocols and ethic rules and stuff. But for an open source software community, it's really it'll be a big resource for them if they can tap into that potential, because especially undergraduate students, they are looking for something relevant to their own field. They want to know what it feels like to work on a project, to do something relevant. So they're hungry for opportunities. So being able to tap into that will actually give a big resource to the community and also help grow the community pretty rapidly as well. The other one is corporate outreach. So again, I don't think I really need to explain this, but there are a lot of organizations and businesses that still use Perl very heavily, and it will be in their best interest as well to be able to progress and advance Perl, so that it makes their job easier as well. So that again gives a bigger resource pool for the community if they are able to potentially collaborate with them. So so this is just an example of the some of the techniques that we did. There were some where that was a little more specific towards the community. Again, I've extensively explained all of it in the report. So I would encourage all of you to read it. So again, I've just put a link here. So again, the report is not super complicated. It's more of, again, I've concentrated more on the results on it rather than the methodology. But if anyone's interested in the methodology, I will be doing my thesis defense soon. So so yeah, you're welcome to join it and be a part of the presentation. Again, after that, I will publish a thesis document that's like pretty big. So I basically extensively compile everything that I've done for the past 2 years. And yeah, please be a part of it. You won't be allowed to ask any questions though, but yeah, please be a part of it. And you can always get back to me after that on any suggestions, feedback, or any questions that you guys have. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk to you guys today. I know it's not a very big talk, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Please.
Thank you. I think this is interesting, and at least doing this or maybe doing something in depth or on the basis would be helpful. But my question for you is, for your master's thesis, are you studying just Perl, or are there other open source communities, and if so, what are they?
No, so if for this project we've only looked at Perl. Oh, sorry. So your question was to if I've looked at other communities or just Perl. So to answer that, I've only looked up to the point of developing the techniques was only with Perl. And the other, so at when for some of the techniques that have helped and revitalized some of the communities, it was more general techniques. I actually studied a few of the other communities. For example, there was a WHO community. I know it's not relevant to Perl, but that particular technique can actually really help when modified specifically for Perl. Can really help in revitalizing the community. So to answer your question, yes, mostly only Perl, and just a very the last part just to compare some of the other communities as well. Yep. Yep. Please.
For some of the things that I think that, for example, the perception of module updates, that was based on persistence, right? That was like surveys you got, right? That was the perception.
Sorry, you mean the so this was again from a lot of public information that is available, and from the interviews as well.
So that was going to be my question. There's certain components to this where they have people's perception.
Yeah.
And then there's things like CPAN, you can go check.
Yeah.
You can see upload frequency, you can see when the last time.
Yeah.
Given thing was uploaded, new thing.
Yeah. So
You fairly do where it says like the module is open to be adopted.
Yeah.
So you can compare that data,
Mm-hmm.
compare perception.
Yep.
That could be another component.
Yeah.
Are they the same? Are they accurate?
Yeah. So again, for this, we had to. So from the public information, again, a lot of it was a review of these, like you said, the CPAN, whatever was there on the repository, and also from the interviews, there were we had I think out of 6, I think 2 of them actually spoke about how they had to move away from Perl and Raku to implement certain things. So that's when we came out of the conclusion of modules being abandoned. But yeah. So if there's no other questions, yeah.
One other
Mm-hmm.
maybe. I guess probably not all of them, so much code from different open source communities on GitHub or these
Mm-hmm.
public. It would be interesting if you had sort of a methodology to be able to use just that public information to come up with a certain level of
Yes. So actually, that's part of the next phase, which is not done by me because I'll be graduating soon. So actually, my supervisor and 2 of her colleagues are actually trying to do a grant proposal where they review this as well as the documentation available to come out again with some sort of a report with what are the in any inconsistencies or any what is missing basically, and what can be worked upon. So she's even going to try and create some sort of an automated tool to basically scrub all that information and get it out as well. So that's a new grant proposal that she's working on. But again, it's just in the first stage now. Not sure how far it will go, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Yes, your first bullet point under social norm is different from all the other bullet points in the sense, in 2 senses. You say people in general, so presumably people not just in the Perl community, don't feel pressure to contribute to open source software.
Yeah.
Whereas every other one of your bullet points was very pro community specific, and we could probably name names.
Yeah.
Serious.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you or like your their colleagues, if they have any sense of how the pressure or the frequency of people wanting to make contributions to open source software over the years has changed.
Yeah, so actually, she's. Oh, yeah. So again, sorry. So your question was on specifically of social norms to see over the years how basically that has played a role in volunteerism in open source, right? So she, as part of her PhD thesis, she actually studied a wide variety of open source software organizations, and she actually talks about how volunteerism has changed over the years. So initially, volunteerism was done because initially open source software in general was not exactly open source. It was either backed up by a corporate organization, or it was there was some sort of a foundation or a corporate foundation behind it. So most of the time they never used to worry about volunteers because they used to be most of the basically the people used to be part of that corporate organization. But over the years, as open source software has become more and more independent, so I can give an example was Open Office and LibreOffice. So the fork, what happened, right? So once I think it was Oracle who took over the I think Sun Microsystems, that was the main entity behind Open Office. People actually broke away from this thing from Open Office and created LibreOffice. It was called the Document Foundation, if I'm not wrong. So even though so over there, what we've seen is that community that particular the fork, after the fork, what happened is that that community became larger and more diverse because of people actually joining out of their own interest, not because there was any social pressures. But before, when it was just Open Office, most of the people were working because they were part of that corporate entity. So that's so over the years, the definition of open source itself also has changed.
See the same thing in they had at one time you had to be an open source programmer and have a big GitHub account to get a job.
Exactly. So yeah, so I mean, for any person who wants again like a job to create a portfolio, the first step would be to try and get some sort of experience in it, and one of the best ways is to do some volunteering work, right? So even I mean, if you just take volunteering in general, people do that to enhance their resume and stuff. So that was the social pressure that was that was put on them. But again, when the definition of open source changed, the concept of volunteering has completely changed as well. Yeah, please.
So there was a lot of items in your report that you couldn't cover. The talk would be very
Too big.
hours long.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of specific issues that people gave you that are in the report. Can you please tell us if you have done anything to come up with ideas for specific solutions or actions to take in that regard?
So it's funny Will should ask me that question because I've been working. So your question was to what are the specific things that I've done to implement that in Perl. So actually, Will and I have been working together for the past couple of months to try and make some of these more specific to Perl. So that it will be easier to implement. And out of some of the discussions that we had with Stuart, I think the plan is to create some sort of groups that will take a specific issue and the solutions for them and try to get those implemented. So I think very soon we'll be having a separate presentation on that, how we've managed to change this only for Perl and Raku. So yeah. Thank you, Will, for asking that question. So that's just basically the next step that we've done just before I graduate. So yeah. Any other questions? No. So I guess that's it. Thank you so much, guys.